call the meeting to order. Board members, staff, guests, and members of the public are reminded that the full authority board meeting is being recorded and will be posted to the authority's website along with the official written minutes. As such, comments and opinions expressed may be published, and any comments expressed by individual board members, guests, and the general public are their own and do not represent the opinions or comments of the full authority or the KCCA Board of Directors. The recorded video of the full authority meeting is not considered the official record of that meeting. The official record of the full authority meeting shall consist solely of the minutes approved by the full authority. With that, any declarations of pecuniary interest from members this evening? Seeing none, no delegations, so our first item would be our minutes from our September 20th full authority meeting. I'm going to move around seconder on the minutes, please. All kinds of hands. Bill and Ralph. Questions or comments on the minutes from anyone? Seeing none, all in favor? And that's carried unanimously. Moving along, next item, matters arising. We got our project tracking report, which was included. Anything you want to highlight other than the park is quiet?
Well, it's another video that I have queued up. And this one I thought I'd play tonight because it showcases some of Cliff's drone footage. This is Dalewood. So that was posted to the Facebook feeds. Just a thank you to campers for a good season. And unless there was any other questions on the project tracking, that was it.
Any questions, members? None. We also had our media report there as well. Questions on any of that? Comments, Bill?
Yeah, I found the article about the CCCA interesting.
Yeah. There hasn't been a lot really of discussion about that even from the legislation changes. They're not really talking about, we're getting it at health unit level, we're getting it at utility levels, but I haven't heard anything about forced mergers with CAs, so not even in the discussions that they've been having, so it's an interesting article. Yeah. I agree. If there's nothing further on those, can we get a motion to receive both of those for information? Okay. Marcel? All right, Marcel and Ian. All in favor? That's carried. Watershed conditions report. It's dry. Well, and it's interesting because you go to anything that we go to, any meetings, conferences, and everybody's talking about how wet their summer was. Okay, not here.
Yeah.
Everywhere but us, apparently. Had a little more rain, but it's nice to have gotten a little bit.
Just make one comment there too. Despite what rumors were flying around, Port Stanley was not evacuated on the Sunday. I don't know where that story came about. There was wind warnings, there were high waves, but there was no flooding.
Didn't get level, eh?
We did issue, we did issue a statement, but I thought it was very,
Well, it's just a
it
warning.
was just there's high winds and.
Yeah, and they were.
There were other areas along the coast that they were recommending people maybe move away from the water, but I didn't, yeah.
The concern for us there is that the lake level was so high, and
Yeah.
as certain height of the lake and when the winds are coming from a certain direction,
Yeah.
then there is flooding potential, and the storm was setting up in that manner. We thought the risk was very low, but
It didn't happen.
it didn't happen.
Tsunami and imminent.
All right, can we get a motion to receive the Jennifer's report for information by Max and second by, was that you, Ralph? Did you have anything?
I did, yes.
All right.
Or
All-
Dave could have it.
I don't care.
All in favor? That's carried. And then we have the Conservation Ontario Council report, just an update there from a meeting, seems like it was a long time ago, but it really wasn't. It's only a few weeks ago, wasn't it, Elizabeth?
Madam Chair, just a couple of things. I included the Conservation Ontario Council report on the CA Act, the new CA Act, Bill 139. CEO did appear in front of the standing committee just yesterday. There's about 4 days marked off in the books for the standing committee, mainly because Bill 139 is also linked to the Planning Act. There was a number of presentations for that. Everything looks to appear as that if the bill will be passed by December 31st, or at least that's what we're hearing. The goal is to be. A couple of things mentioned in that report. Conservation Ontario does have a transfer payment set up with MNRF to develop best management practices for the bylaws that would be required after the act is passed. So they're coming up with a draft template for all CAs to use. So that is underway. The Service Delivery Review Committee has also been formed, and again, that was another action that was identified by MNRF in the Conserving Our Futures document. And the goal there is for that review committee to be advising and looking at possible recommendations in terms of new policies and guidelines that would roll out of the new act. Yeah, so the rest of it, I think, was included in the report, unless there's any questions.
Questions from members? Myself?
Through you, Madam Chair, are we just receiving this tonight for information? I did speak to the OFA and tried to get the OFA's position and how close they were together. And although the information from the OFA is back to June, which is after the first reading of the paper, I couldn't get today the information for the second reading, but from my read of back in June, there were certainly some differences between the OFA and what is being proposed. But since there's still opportunity, we'll leave that for later and proceed with information.
Yeah, the minister was at that Conservation Ontario meeting and did stress they want this passed, third reading and passed before, because we know they're going into an election. So they would like to get this done, and I think their focus is really more so on the Planning Act issues than it really is on the CA Act. It'd be nice to have some of the things that are in the Act kind of cleaned up. Legislation has changed and they haven't actually cleaned up the Act to kind of go along with it, so be interesting to see if they can hit that deadline. I know they're striving for it, so. Motion to receive that for information. Dave? Second. Max? Sorry. It's too warm here. All in favor? It's carried. All right, next up, we have correspondence. So we have one piece of correspondence that was in the advance package. Of course, and that was acknowledging receipt of our comments on the proposed sewage bypass reporting act. Do we have any additional correspondence? Nothing else, just that to receive and file. You want a second? Myself? Dave? All in favor? That's carried. All right, we're up to our statements. Anything to highlight? Things look good. Final numbers, we know we're not at the final numbers for the parks yet, but they still look really good, and expect a few.
They've met and exceeded their targets.
They certainly have, so, and that's good, because that money all goes back into the parks, so that's good to see, into the reserves and back into the parks. So, questions on any of the statements from members? Marcel?
Through you, Madam Chair, there were two items that seemed out of percentage
Okay.
appropriate. I'm sure there's a reason for it, I just don't know it. So on page 35, the watershed rehabilitation, tree purchases were about 11,000 over estimated budget. Does that mean we had extra money come in to offset those expenses?
Yes.
Perfect. And on, I think, 38 is the other one, I think. Maybe it's 39.
Thanks, Joe.
Sorry, there was one more, I didn't write them down, but it's some. No, I can't find it.
If you do, let us know.
Yep.
Anything else from members? No, can we get a mover and seconder? Okay, Bill? Seconders? Ian? Did you find it? Oh, okay. On the statements then, all in favor? And that's carried. New business. Elizabeth, will you take that first item?
So as mentioned in the advanced package, the staff have undertaken a complete review and a comprehensive view of the authority's occupational health and safety policy. We've basically relied on some templates through the HR Downloads website that we're members of, which was a great resource in undertaking this. The new policy really updates and consolidates a lot of pre-existing documents at the authority, but brings them into all under one comprehensive policy. The biggest change in terms of the policy is it now includes safe work procedures, which is something that we've always wanted to actually have and put in paper, and so a lot of time and energy has been put into everything from grass cutting to just a detailed description of what those tasks entail and how to do them safely. And so those that now can be used in our training of seasonal staff and other staff as they come on board. So I'm pretty happy with it. It's a comprehensive document. I did only include, just for the purposes of paper saving and to keep the file postable online, the table of contents was included in the advanced package, as well as the health and safety policy and violence and harassment statement as well. But the document has been posted to the internal website for members to take a look at. Because it is so large, I'm not asking you to approve it today. I've given you another couple of weeks to review it and ask staff for any questions or clarifications, and then we'll look at a recommendation to approve in November.
Any initial questions from anybody? It's a lot of reading, but it's I think it's really important stuff. Marcel?
So, Madam Chair, just, I made a request to get a copy of it because I couldn't download it.
Mm-hmm.
Elizabeth has it on a stick for anyone else who needs it as well.
There you go. We don't need a motion on that right now. We'll deal with that at the next meeting. Marcel, did you find your other question?
If I can go back.
Yes.
Um,
I know you were looking for that. We'll go back to the statements for 1 second.
It was, and it's probably very simple again. In budget to actual, on page 42, there was a transfer to 117 from 12,000 to 35. I'm sure it's another one of those, oh yeah, I knew that, but I don't know what it is.
Which page is it?
42, about 2/3 of the way down.
Yeah.
There was a transfer to
So the only transfer to reserve that we, the department you're referring to, the volunteer fundraising, that's kind of the flow-through department for any fundraising that we would come in. It would hit that department and then go out to the department where the project is being enacted. So for 117, the transfer from reserve that's there would be the transfer from our reserve, and then the transfer beyond that is solely increased fundraising that's coming into the authority and then flowing back out to that 117 department. for your tree planting and things like that, unexpected funds.
Question? Okay. We're going to move along to, we'll come back to the November meeting prepared to address and answer, give you all kinds of questions on those documents. With that, we'll move on to the Dalewood Dam Patterson Forest Management pilot project. So,
Madam Chair, this report was prepared by Jeff. He has a conflict tonight. If required, he can be in attendance later in the meeting. But I did say I would present it on his behalf, and as long as there's not any pressing questions that I can't answer, then he can continue on to his other commitments tonight. But I'll start the presentation anyways. Just have a couple of notes on a slide here. So the recommendation this evening is that KCCA retain the services of GWG Resources to administer and oversee a harvest operation for the Dalewood Dam Patterson tract as outlined in the staff report. If you recall, this is a pilot project that's appeared on the agenda before, recognizing that the forest health of this tract was concerning, and through Jeff's initiative wants to look at it, actually managing this forest in terms of going in and doing some harvest for the overall health of the forest. The site has been marked and under good forestry practices, and GWG Services was already contracted by the authority to undertake that service and mark the trees. So that study has been done. This would be the next step to actually go out and hire a contractor to come in and do the harvest. We're recommending that GWG Resource Services administer and oversee that harvest operation and administer the RFP out to the contractors, basically to ensure good oversight of the project, but also ensure that there's an unbiased contractor selection. Because we want to maintain the Forest and Soil Supervisor's neutral position on the topic. He both doubles in our tree planting program and doubles under contract with the County of Elgin as the tree commissioner. There's no cost to the authority based on the estimated timber value of the trees that would be harvested. This would cover the costs associated with the harvest as well as any associated fees. And there would be enough funds left over for future management activities as well. The only other thing is that the map was included in the project. There's two areas that we were looking at in terms of forest health. Those are outlined. This first contract out for harvest would mainly be looking at the area number 1, so outlined in red. The second area we're looking at other alternatives in terms of the harvest in that area. We do need landowner permission to access and retrieve the logs, and we haven't had the landowner permission for that yet. So we're also exploring other avenues in terms of the harvest operation in that area as well.
questions? Marcel?
I do, I thought maybe others would. So, I'm curious on a couple fronts. How many acres are we talking? And what trees are we talking? Is it just ash or is it more than just the ash?
If it's more than ash.
No,
that
there
was-
is more than ash. There's some red pine.
That's, okay, yeah, there is.
Um,
So, I think this is great. The County of Middlesex has done this for years, and we have probably one of the bigger tracts in Middlesex County of tree forest that we harvest. And we have almost every year some areas that we harvest, so this is great. Just with the experience from Middlesex County, we usually anticipate, I won't say significant, but some revenue from the harvest. And in reading the conclusions, it's basically nominal at best, and I'm surprised. I thought there would be a little more than just a nominal amount for the Conservation Authority.
Madam Chair, I'm being conservative. This is our first time going out. I don't want to over-promise and under-deliver. And to answer, the area number 1 is 12 acres.
So, if I read right, there was almost 400 trees, or 350 trees that are being harvested?
183 were marked with sawlog potential, and another 164 were identified as potential firewood.
Almost 350.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, I would hope, and as long as we're not accepting that this is neutral for us, this is great. But I wasn't sure how to read this, so.
We're looking for 100. Just kidding.
My stress is that there's no cost to the authority.
The revenue we get will pay for that fee, plus give us some money for future.
Yes.
We're just not sure yet how much.
I would expect significant. but
Should be.
I'll make the move the motion.
Thank you, Marcel. Do we have a seconder for that recommendation? Dave? Further questions or comments? Seeing none, on the motion, all in favor? That's carried unanimously. All right. The next item we've got on the agenda is the Bill 148 potential impacts. Yeah, which we're all talking a lot about these days around the council tables and every other table we sit around.
Sorry, my clicker's not working through heads. So Madam Chair and members, I think I gave a pretty comprehensive outline of possible impacts in the advanced report, but just to do the highlights, Bill 148, the Fair Workplaces Better Job Act, was introduced in June of 2017. It's working its way through the system similarly as the CA Act review is as well. If passed, it would introduce changes to the Employment Standards Act and would have some significant or possibly significant changes to our operations. Just to highlight a couple of those, obviously there's an increase to minimum wage, and I'm sure all of you through your municipalities or just general public have heard a lot of talk in the media about the increase. Basically moving up to $14 an hour January 1st, 2018, and then moving to $15 an hour in January 2019. This would impact mainly our forestry and campgrounds. Campgrounds more so. Forestry we can look at recouping in terms of the contracts that we do. But for the campgrounds, all of that has to be recouped from fee increases. As you know, no municipal levy goes to support the campgrounds. So we'd be looking at fee increases to support those increases in minimum wage. We expect that there'll be kind of a little bit of possible domino effect in that other outside contractors will have to increase their fees. So external service providers increasing their fees, but at this time we don't know what those increased costs might be. Another Bill 148 requirement is the same wage to temporary employees as permanent employees for the same work. I don't believe that this applies to the authority at this time, so that's not a concern. There's two things coming possible in the bill in regards to scheduling. One of them is that a minimum of 3 hours be paid if the shift is canceled within 48 hours before the shift starts. So where this scenario could arise for the authority is we have a number of staff scheduled out in the park, say a lifeguard scheduled for a shift, but then arrives and there's a thunderstorm come up that we didn't anticipate. If we hadn't canceled that shift within 40 hours, we would owe that person 3 hours of pay. Quite typically, that's a situation that doesn't arise in the parks. If it did arise where a storm blew up and the lifeguards had to close the pool, they're quite often, we keep their shift going, we just reassign them in the park. the one that will impact us, especially the campgrounds, is the 3 hours pay for every 24-hour period on call. And this is a difficult one. It's being played out a lot in terms of scenarios back and forth with the various conservation authorities. On call, you will see in a variety of the job descriptions at the authority, whether it's for the campgrounds or flood forecasting, meaning that Joe, myself, the water conservation supervisor are on call in a flood event or on call for the entire flood season should the need arise. And I believe, there's going to have to be a little bit more exploration in terms of what does Bill 148 actually define as on-call. And what are we defining it as in our job descriptions? Is it necessarily on-call or is it available for call back? So those things have to be explored because I can tell you that providing 3 hours of pay for our conservation area coordinators for the entire camping season would not be sustainable. The vacation, 3 weeks after 5 years, that's already accounted for in our current vacation policy, so there's no anticipated impact there. The paid emergency leave days is concerning again for the campgrounds. So there's, under the new act, there's being proposed 10 emergency leave days per employee, and 2 would be paid. And I can't find anything that necessarily in the bill separates out what class of employee that would pertain to. So it's very likely the way it is, the way I'm reading it now, and some feedback that I've had from the City of London, HR people looking at this, is that there's no specifications to what class of employee. It's considered all employees would be entitled to that. So that would include our seasonal staff. So that would be, again, an increased cost to the campground to begin to budget for that. It'll also create a scheduling pinch as well, because we have a skeleton staff in the campgrounds, and if seasonal staff can basically call in at a personal emergency leave day, we need to have other staff available to fill in those unexpected vacancies. So again, a pressure point for the campgrounds moving forward. Unfortunately, without knowing whether the bill is going to be passed, it's a difficult position to be in terms of finalizing or even projecting the 2018 budget. And that was the main message to the board today. I'm sure you're hearing it from your member municipalities as well. But it is something that's difficult to plan for at this time.
Questions, comments from members? Dave?
First of all, the county yesterday had a presentation made by our HR people as to what the impacts are, both at the county level and what it could mean for lower tier. I know all the CAOs for the lower tiers also received that information, I think, last week. I sat in on a meeting at AMO concerning this, and it scared me then, and more details that come out, I'm getting even more frightened about this. The cost for municipalities and conservation authority, all our agencies, when you get right down to it, is huge. At the municipal level, for those with volunteer firefighters, the cost is just unreal what the potential is. They're estimating on these on-call things, depending on how that's set up, it could be as much as $27,000 per firefighter, because they are essentially on call 365 days. But you have to, so we're going to have to change how things are done, there's no doubt, if it goes through. Now the other thing during that conference, Premier Wynne did say that she would see to it that there would be another look at this bill, and their intention was not to hurt municipalities. Now that was her statement.
Okay.
That was at the bullpit session
Yeah, she did
just
say
before that. So whether that happens or not, the sad part is we're talking about this as far as us, how it's gonna affect small businesses, it's just another issue altogether. This is huge. I know the county has certainly sent a letter in saying that they are opposed to this. AMO has certainly raised concerns. I'm not saying it would help, it probably wouldn't hurt. We should at least go on record and maybe send a letter in saying that we have concerns about this to the
Potential
government.
impacts of this.
And again, send it to the local MPP, I should say, as well as to the Premier, that this is going to be devastating. We talk about the campgrounds. That's our lifeline. Campgrounds is what's paying for a lot of our programs. And if it gets hurt there, then our programs are gonna get hurt. And the only other way to compensate for that is then you start raising fees, and then you get to that point where
Nobody's gonna show.
that's beyond what people are gonna be willing to pay. And it becomes a vicious cycle, as we all know. So I'm totally opposed to the way that it's written. I mean, does there need to be some changes to the Employment Act, Labor Act? Probably. There's things that they could do, but they don't need to make it so drastic like this. It's gonna affect everybody in Ontario.
Marcel, what do you want to go?
Through you, Madam Chair, just to follow Dave's comments, there was a motion put forward by a municipality in Eastern Ontario, basically asking for support to exactly that. I wonder if it would be worthwhile to support that motion. It was put out by the township of Montague. And basically it says that whereas the township maintains a motivated and well-functioning volunteer fire department. Oh, sorry, this is just fire department, so forget it. Sorry, I take that back.
But there's lots of
Yes.
examples out there, there are for sure, yeah. Bill?
If you, Madam Chair, just the comment, the addition of one field position may lessen the effort on call. So would that be possibly someone above the park staff, below the coordinators, that would come on, say, a late shift and do both parks to kind of take the, is that what you were thinking, or is that still kind of in the thinking stage?
Madam Chair, I think it's in the thinking stage. I've mentioned further on in the report, that's a proposal that we'd like to take to the Personnel and Finance Committee coming up. But I think I mentioned in the report that the guys put an awful lot of time into the campgrounds. Their days off are Tuesday and Wednesdays. And during that time period, there is no one in the park in terms of supervising the seasonal staff.
They're technically still on call.
So they're technically still on call, and that's the dilemma that we have. In their job descriptions currently, they're on call, and those are the words, on call, from May 1st to September 30th. And so that's concerning to me. One, we had already started talking about the amount of overtime and commitment that those positions take. But when you look at that, we would owe them 3 hours for every day between May 1st and September 30th. That's what I mean by that it's unsustainable. So the ability to introduce a third staff member in the parks that would be basically shared between the parks, that could handle some of those basically triage problems for them during their days off or during their off shifts would be beneficial and hopefully help some of these concerns out in terms of the on-call. But also the back pressure, we basically handled it thus far. So when the guys have their days off, the maintenance supervisor and the director of operations are available to staff to kind of triage that. But when you look at their work levels, it's unsustainable. And so we have to look at some assistance for the parks, regardless really of the employee.
So we've got, Dave's recommending they send a letter. We get concurrence with the board on that. We get a letter drafted and off to the province about the impacts what this is gonna have for us as a board here. Certainly do that, and then, do a motion to receive this report for information. Well, certainly the Personnel Finance Committee is meeting November 1st. So if they come up with any grand plans between now and the next board meeting, I'll certainly let you know. Go and give that recommendation. And Max, second that? Any further dialogue, discussion? Seeing none on the motion, all in favor? That's carried unanimously. Next up, we've got the next two items we're looking at in our work plan and our budget. We've got some more. Turn it over to Elizabeth. I don't know what I just did. I'll come back. Technology doesn't like me.
I'm going to hang out at the podium, and I'm delivering this report tonight on behalf of the field staff. Mike and Rob are here, but they've been busy, very busy out in the field doing the Dalewood North expansion, and so hopefully we'll have a report on that and some pictures for you of some of the stuff that's been happening in the field since the campground's closed. This, I think, is the third report that we're bringing to board members in terms of overview for the budget 2018 and 2019. It's the third year of our 4-year plan. And what I wanted to highlight tonight is the conservation lands. And what I mean by conservation lands is basically 4 departments, Dalewood Campground. We have 200 sites there. In terms of capital investment over the last 4 years, we've put in a new gatehouse, we've done some great pool refurbishments, and then this year put in a new playground. Lake Whitaker similarly has just over 200 sites. Group camping also exists there. In terms of capital improvement, we've had a number of site upgrades over the last 4 to 5 years, and a new playground in there as well. Significant areas really encompasses all those other areas outside of the campground, including Dan Patterson, the Kirk Cousins Management Area, Union Dam. We have 20 kilometers of hiking trails that we manage, 500 acres of land. Capital in the last 4 or 5 years, you'll remember the well down at Dan Patterson. We have and the Dalewood North Trail that's being undertaken this year as well. In terms of the other areas, and probably the most exciting thing we've done in conservation lands in a little bit is our partnership with the member municipalities for the Cattle Creek Dog Park that was undertaken in 2014. So for all of that stuff, we have 3 full-time staff looking after and dedicated to those 4 program areas. Also to note, of those 4 program areas, 2 of them, your municipal levy doesn't hit. So the campgrounds are fully functioning with no municipal levy. They account for their own capital and capital investment. Over the last 4 to 5 years, we've been reinvesting at least $30,000 per year to the reserves, and that's coming from the campground revenue. So it goes into reserves either for capital infrastructure, or it's going directly back out into our programs and services. And I think the reason we've been able to do this is our campgrounds really are, we've marketed them, and I think they are campgrounds of choice. We have a waiting list of over 56 people waiting for seasonal sites, and that's well over the seasonal sites that we'll have available coming up in the next year. So again, our success is really marketing ourselves as campgrounds of a choice, and I think efficient use of our staff resources. But again, over the last 4 or 5 years, we've made smart infrastructure choices. We're choosing infrastructure that's more efficient. A great example is the Dalewood Pool. There's more automated systems, which means we have less maintenance cost, and that equals cost savings. We'll also this year be introducing hydrometers at the Dalewood campgrounds, which means campers will have more control over the costs that they have, and less costs are borne by the authority. So hopefully it will be a mutually beneficial investment. We have better staffing as well. We worked hard on that over the last couple of years by pooling staff resources. We've centralized the visitor services program out in the campgrounds. So VS is kind of managed out of the head office and shipped out into the parks. And so we don't have all these one-off programs actually happening in the campgrounds. Our campers know what our core events are, and they are actually booking their sites around those core events. So instead of having a volume of activities, we have 4 core programs that are very quality oriented. So we have Halloween, we have the carnival, we have the fishing derby. And as I said, that's being recognized by our clientele, and they're booking those weekends to participate in those events. We're also attracting, hopefully, and retaining better staff for the summer by offering incentives. The picture in the bottom right is our ambassador for a year. It's $100 that we give out to a summer student that's shown excellence, has been an ambassador for the authority with the clients, and has stayed with us for the entire season, which is a real benefit for the guides to have their seasonal staff for the entire season and not check out early. In terms of looking ahead, both for the next 2 years, our campgrounds really are in demand. I mentioned the waiting list, but it's not only our campgrounds that we're seeing an increase in use of, it's also our day use facilities and our hiking trails. People want to get out and use our green spaces. Municipalities are referring to our green spaces more and more green infrastructure, and we have other agencies coming forward looking for us to lead in terms of that infrastructure and to partner with in terms of that infrastructure as well. It's also creating increasing pressures in terms of hazard trees, so more and more development is bordering our properties, which means we have to basically be getting out on our 5 acres of property and looking at trees of concerns and dealing with them. There's more demand for increased trail standards and a desire for the authority to expand either its trails or to look at more uses on our trails. I think the report mentioned there's a local mountain bike organization right now that is very keen on getting access to our trails. The current staffing I mentioned in the last report and in answer to questions from the members. There's certain pressures from Bill 148, but even irregardless of Bill 148, we're kind of maxed out in terms of the job splitting that we can do. So each campground has 1 coordinator and 10 seasonal staff during the seasons. The coordinators, they need their days off on Tuesday and Wednesday, and right now there's no oversight in the campground except for the director of operations and the maintenance supervisor, and they're too busy with their own workloads to backfill those positions on an ongoing basis. And all of this comes up to, we already mentioned tonight, there's a fine line in terms of the pressure of our campgrounds. We're only looking at the revenue coming in from our fees, and as much we want to increase our fees to keep pace, but we still need a reinvestment back into our campgrounds and our infrastructure of about $30,000. So we want to raise fees enough that we're providing a standard of service, but not too much that we're losing our clientele. And that's a balancing act that we're having to undertake, especially for 2018 and 2019. Later on the agenda, we have the proposed 2018 fee increases that we're promoting or recommending this year. Those fee increases would provide for appropriate staffing for the standard of service that our clientele have come to expect. It would allow for, again, that idea of another full-time staff person coming on, initially as a contract person, a year contract person, and if we like that, then it would be looking at more permanent in future years. But again, we need to have more supervision and more staff in our field clientele. If you go back to that prior screen, we have 3 full-time staff operating those 4 program areas. It's concerning when you think that 2 of those full-time staff members are dedicated to the campgrounds for at least 7 months of the year. And then we're trying to accomplish all our hiking trails, our trail maintenance, our tree hazard trees in the other 4 months, and I would say they still need time for vacation on top of that. I believe that the fees that we're proposing in 2018 accounts for hopefully projected expenses increases in terms of garbage, etc. But more importantly, it brings the authority in line with the 2017 average of neighboring CAs. So I don't think the fee increase will see us necessarily lose clientele. And it protects our reinvestment to the capital reserves that I spoke to in the last slide. The capital projections we highlighted in this report, again, to put it on the radar screen of the board members. Certainly a more comprehensive report on capital will be brought back towards the end of the year. But in terms of these departments, there are, again, certain pressures. The Lakeshore washroom, I believe in the budget reports last year, you saw some of the scary pictures of the condition of the washroom. We'd be looking to replace that washroom next year with a projection of about $80,000 right now. Lake Whitaker water system, again, is a priority. We know there's some pressure tanks that need to be replaced there. And the pool, certainly not the refurbishment that we undertook at Dalewood, but we want to bring it in line in terms of new pumps, cover, and pool liner, which will, I think, have a decrease in our maintenance costs moving forward. We need some new basketball backboards at Lake Whitaker. And then there's just a standard item of pooled assets, so any upgrades and upkeep that we need to do to our roads or tables. This is picnic tables and signs out in the campgrounds. Looking forward to 2019, a major purchase there would be for the gators. These are our workhorses in the campgrounds, and so a cost of about $40,000. And then again, refocusing on Lake Whitaker, we've spent a lot of time bringing infrastructure up at Dalewood. We need to refocus back out to Lake Whitaker and look at some potential site upgrades as well out at Whitaker. I think Mike would speak to just about every 30-amp site is booked on not just the long weekends now, but every weekend. And so we need to be offering more 30-amp sites to our campers. And then a dump trailer would be a more efficiencies out in the campgrounds as well. I should mention that staff are currently working on a vehicle equipment replacement policy that will help evaluate the replacement of our equipment based on more factors than just life expectancy. So look at things like mileage and maintenance of our vehicles and weigh those into whether or not we need to replace them. And that will be brought back to the board at a later date. Looking ahead past 2019 into the next 4-year plan, staffing and increased demands of the public use of our properties and hiking trails will need to be considered ongoing. I think it'll be a constant pressure moving forward and something to watch for. But staff continue to look at revenue generating opportunities and mutually benefiting relationships with partners. And just one example is the day camps that we introduced at Dalewood. I think last year was the first year. That was repeated this year and actually introduced out to Lake Whitaker as well. And so those, it's small funds, but definitely something that's been mutually beneficial for the Early Learning Center and an increased revenue on our side as well. That's it in a nutshell.
Questions on the budget items there or around the campground fees? I think we covered up two there.
I have a little.
We'll do more detail on the campground
Yeah.
fees, but anything on the budget one, the information that's been brought forward? Seeing none, can we get a motion to receive that for information? Dave and Ralph, all in favor? And that's carried unanimously. So next, campground fees. Elizabeth's touched on that a bit in this, and she's probably got some more details for us as we're looking at increasing some of those fees a little bit to help offset some of the increases.
So again, as mentioned in the last report, the proposed 2018 fee increases would provide for appropriate staffing for the standard of service that we've come to expect. We've mentioned a number of times the need for some another staff position for the campgrounds in order to provide some in-park supervision during the coordinator's days off. As well as that position would provide assistance in the off-season to address some of the hazard trees, property management, just to be another hands-on deck for the field staff. It also prepares us for some of the potential increases that would come out of Bill 148, mainly the increases to the minimum wage. I think if anything is coming out of Bill 148, I think we need to be prepared for minimum wage increase, and this is the department where that would most affect. So on the screen in front of you, the black is the proposed fee increases. The fee in white is what the fees were in 2017. A couple of additional points on the proposed fee increase. It brings, in terms of the seasonal rate, it brings those fees in comparisons to the other campgrounds in our area, but only to their 2017 rates. And that's important to understand, is that a lot of those, our neighboring CAs are actually still considering their 2018 fees. And we anticipate, again, with Bill 148 and some of the other things that are coming, that those fees, their fees will increase. So again, the increase that we're considering or proposing to you this evening only brings our fees in line with the 2017 average, which was $2,474 for a 30 amp site. I should also mention that our fees include HST, which a lot of the neighboring VAs, there's added extras on top of those fees, such as they might charge, HST would be on top of that. The other thing that we're looking at in terms of setting the seasonal fee for 2018 is establishing a base seasonal rate for camping. And so if you look what's on the screen now, unserviced, so no hydro, no water, for the season would be $2,000. For a 15 amp site, it would be $2,200. The $200 recognizing would be the hydro portion of that fee, specifically for Dalewood next year. And the 30 amp, it would be a $400 charge. So there's a base fee of $2,000, and the $200 or the $400 would recognize the hydro usage of those sites. So the recommendation for the board this evening is that those campground fees be approved.
Questions, Dave?
Just for clarification on the electrical part of it. So they give it's 2,000 of base, the $200 say for the 15 amp, the $200 is a deposit, and then based on actual usage, they'll get refund or have to pay more.
That's the case for Dalewood.
Right, for Dalewood.
For Dalewood, but for Lake Whitaker, it'd be a $2,200 fee at this time still. So it gives, again, we've had the discussion at the board in previous reports, but it does give the seasonal campers a little more leeway in terms of their expenses. So we know that they can control their hydro costs.
And in the past, the HST was always included.
And it is in these
Right,
prices. as
so
well.
it's just continuing on.
Yeah.
Bill?
I guess when I hear the fact that we have a waiting list for seasonals in both parks, and with our proposed fees, we're still going to be at the lower limit of our neighboring campgrounds. I'm just wondering how we arrived at that percentage. Could we bear a bit more? Or do you think, that's one thing, I don't want to upset our existing campers, but, you know, I've drove through the parks and these guys keep an excellent, tidy, very manicured, nice park. I drove through some of the other parks and it's not the case. So people come to these parks for a reason. I'm just thinking with the list we have and the way that the parks are run, maybe we shouldn't try to stick to the lower part. Maybe we should go a bit more, I don't know.
I'll maybe let Joe answer that one.
Through you, Madam Chair. When you look at the cost comparisons, our rate isn't necessarily falling in the lower end. I think we're still comparing the 2017 rate, so we don't know exactly where we're going to be in 2018. But one thing we've realized, we came to the conclusion this year, we've usually had this discussion over fees in August so that we can get the values out before our seasonals leave to assist with reevaluating for next year. And what we realized, specifically last year, there was a few CAs that made some of these larger jumps last year, or what we've seen a trend is adding additional costs. So, for example, an extra fridge in your shed is an extra fee, where in our park it's inclusive. So what we've done this year in our comparisons is looked at, well, ours is inclusive, so, and I would say probably 80% of our seasonals have a fridge in their shed, so we've considered those extra fees in our comparison. So if you were to look just at the rate, and this is where some might say, you're not on the low end, it's only $23.50 here, but this campsite with $23.50 charges you $150 for a fridge, it only gives you one vehicle permit, so it's very difficult across the board to get an actual comparison because there's different days, there's different additional fees. So we do believe the current rate isn't necessarily at the lower end, but it's more in that competitive nature that we can hopefully maintain the interests with that increase. So it's something new we realized this year, and as we talk about the seasonal application form next, we're talking about maybe changing our process of when we review our fees so that we can try and stay more on top of things to be reviewing them this late in the season so we get a better understanding. Because I think last year, for example, in your advanced package, there was a comparison, and what we realized was after we adopted our fees, some of those below average campsites made a jump, and that put us pretty behind in our fees. So we do believe it's competitive, not on the lower end.
Can you just go back to the screen before so we can see old and, yeah, thank you.
That's it.
Oh, this,
Yeah, the water,
that number is one.
yeah.
That's the increase. The 103 is the increase.
Yeah, I was just looking at it
not
going,
the
that's
number.
not right. We're not going from 103 to all of a sudden to 845. That would be the difference.
That would, I believe it's the difference.
I was gonna say, wow, that's a big jump. Is there any further questions or comments from members? So we have a recommendation that the 2018 campground fees be approved. Can I get a mover and seconder for that? Ian? Yeah, I got Ralph, Ian? All right. No further dialogue? All in favor? It's carried. That brings us up to the seasonal camping permit application.
So Madam Chair, there's each year the field staff and